Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for bringing you the most boring presentation of the day at 3 o'clock. But I guess if we can get through quickly, I got 12 slides. The idea is to have a quick discussion about compliance, security policy, and 2015. It's as simple as I can. My name is Jason Gould. I'm the security practice manager at NWN. I help corporations, agencies, startups, anybody who will listen to me define security policy. Whether they buy anything or not, that's not the point. I guess what I'm here to do is to help you identify risk within your organization and then go from there with what tools that you'll need to accomplish whatever you identify. Does anybody have any questions about what this is, why they're here to listen to a 12-slide, 30-minute presentation again today? Everybody's good? Everybody signed up? All good? Okay. All right, so what's the first thing that drives compliance? And I'm going to ask a lot of questions, a fair amount through here, so I will be picking on you guys. I'll point and somebody will answer. But I know what I've written, and I don't necessarily think I'm the smartest man in the room, but you guys who deal with this every day have different ideas about what drives in, what's going to help, and what's not going to help. So you tell me what you think, and we'll make this a little bit more of an interactive discussion and still try to keep it 30 minutes long. How about that? Good? Okay, so what drives compliance? Red shirt. That's one of them. First row, Julianne, what's your name? Jeanette.
What drives compliance?
What drives compliance?
Auditing.
Auditing does drive compliance. Regulatory does drive compliance. But there's a simpler four-letter answer for what is going to drive your compliance policy. Can anybody name it for me? It's 4 letters.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I like you guys getting smart the other day. So, it's the risk, stupid. I mean, that's what I say. I mean, I don't know. But not every risk is worthy. There's going to be a lot of risks out there that are going to face any type of organization. It doesn't matter what you do. If you walk across the street, you get hit by a car, you get tripped on the sidewalk. There's lots of things that can happen. There's risk in everything. It's just a matter of prioritizing where the risk is and how it's going to affect your particular organization. Is business inherently risky? Is coming to work inherently risky? Is walking down the street inherently risky? I mean, I would say so, but it doesn't. But we all think that it is, and we know that it is. It's just a matter of how much risk is tolerable for the type of business that you do. I'd say define compliance. How do you do it? What are the associated risks? If the risk of your business is going out of business because you lose patient information, I'm thinking about you, healthcare organizations, or if you're at risk of losing credit card data, Target, that's you, Anthem, Target. I mean, we've named the risks there, but what happens if you don't do it? Or what happens if you do it and you do it wrong? That's where we're here to help you guys and say compliance is determining it. If you're Target, you're subject to PCI. If you're Anthem, you're subject to HIPAA. So that's where it's going to be. We can definitely help you guys define your risk, but you have to figure out organizationally where it comes from and how it's going to impact the organization. As we said, not all risks are created equal. You're going to have some risks that are regulatory that are just mandatory. You can't do business without them. The government will come in and shut you down, or they'll fine you till the end of time if you don't conduct your business according to that risk, that level of risk. I would say from an end user standpoint, who's in charge of, within your organizations, making sure that you guys that your risk is managed? Black and orange. Navy blue, sorry, I'm sorry.
It would be senior management and information security.
How much responsibility do you,
Are
Mr.
you talking about the user? I am.
Yes.
The end user is responsible, but who holds them accountable would be the outside parties.
Good. So you'd say it's definitely compliance, definitely senior management, definitely IT. What risks do you guys think come from end users who drop a USB stick with patient information or with confidential information on it? Just say it's IP. If you're not even a government agency, but you actually have intellectual property that you're putting out, does that fall on the individual end user? Does that fall on IT? Individual end user. And that's one of the things that people don't always realize when they're thinking about compliance and we're thinking about risk, is because they never realize I, as an individual, am as responsible to everyone for ascending to security policy. So as we move forward, we'll see in the presentation that everybody has a stake in this, and as long as everybody understands that they have a stake in this, they'll be very good at understanding what or how they hold the keys to the kingdom. define your data flow. I tried to not make this presentation specifically about IT, but at some level, when you're thinking about diagrams, it's very easy to look at, this is how our data flows within an organization. So this was one of the diagrams that came up when I went to look for something, and I thought it was useful. Here, there, supplier, materials, orders, order processing, customer, sales, production. All these things are internal processes, whether it's email, it's ERP, it's CRM. All of this is inside an organization. There are layers of risk at every place on this diagram. Sales, if the particular sales rep loses their computer. Lord knows I did. I lost my computer about 6 weeks ago because someone broke into my car and stole my bag out of the back seat. Can it be with the supplier level? Yes. Each individual organization has to have contracts with their suppliers to make sure that data is protected. It doesn't matter where it is. So if you guys use Salesforce or NetSuite for ERP or CRM, there's going to be red lines in their rules and regulations that say this data is protected or else we can sue you for X amount because of a data breach. Material supply, same thing. If you're not getting the right information or if it's not coming to you, something in your IP could be damaged. If you get Gorilla Glass 1 in your Apple instead of Gorilla Glass 2, you could definitely not have the right supply chain. So definitely materials are important. And that happens everywhere. Doesn't matter if it's healthcare, it can be in medical devices. There are lots of different ways that can happen. Production, lots of things. There's always inherent risk. That's the risk of doing business in production. And at the customer level. Make sure that whatever you have is protected until it reaches them. And then once it goes back to you, evidence the leaks that happened in iCloud with some of the famous people. Jennifer Lawrence is one of the major ones. Risk management stakeholders. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. So work with every department. Doesn't matter who you are. Just have a discussion and say, I need somebody from finance, I need somebody from legal, I need someone from IT, someone from sales, even somebody from the janitor's crew. Doesn't matter who they are, but they all have to have a stake in it because there's something in what we call physical security, which is very important in reducing the risk of an organization. And those people sometimes are the janitors and the people who end up cleaning the building at the end of the day, because if data is stolen or if patient records are stolen or IP is stolen, it can also happen at that level. Everybody's got to be involved. The second thing on there is sort of obvious. Interview a cross-section of people. Define the risk at what you do. So if I'm a janitor, make sure the door's closed behind me. If I'm the CFO of an organization, make sure that we're not getting scammed by our auditors. So it's everybody within an organization needs to say, hey, I have a stake in this. I have a piece in this. Locally define the risk at the department level, just said that, and then identify third-party risk. So that was more of like going back to the previous slide, like where do you guys see, if you're using NetSuite, NetSuite is a source of risk for your organization. Using Salesforce, that's a source of, if people on your organization are just using Gmail, could you guys be getting Trojans and malware that are coming in from Gmail or Yahoo or something like that? All of those are third-party forms of risk. Departmental controls and risk mitigation in the context of an organizational compliance policy, that's why we're here. Developing the policy and then making sure that everybody knows what's in it, what's going on, and how they can accede to the policy. So this is sort of an ugly risk analysis sheet, but it serves its purpose. Define my risk. If I'm defining my risk, I say, what happens if I lose intellectual property? What happens if I lose credit card data? What happens if I lose human capital? All these things are places where I can see the value of my organization going down. Doesn't matter if it's government, healthcare, or commercial. What's the vulnerability? IP, lack of encryption, keep smart people from leaving. What's my likelihood? High, high, medium. The departments, multiple departments, the risk level. The risk level that you can see here for all three of these is high. That's one of the main things that we're trying to fix is how do we bring down and or reduce risk? And if that's high, that's some place where we need to work on this. What do? What's our mediating control? For intellectual property, we've got access controls. That's not that hard. If you are a janitor, you're not going to get access to the iPhone design because we don't want you to be able to log in. That's so famously made clear to us with the WikiLeaks, because you had a corporal who got access to high-level and diplomatic cables because of walls being broken down, but access control still not maintained. We as organizations try to do a better job of that in the last 10 years or so with access control, but everybody's got a long way to go because it's just something that affects every organization. In an attempt for transparency, you sometimes break down access controls that shouldn't. Loss of credit card data, that's a DLP issue. If you make sure that you know that, hey, we see that our database has been compromised, our database was stored on Amazon, who compromised our database? That's definitely a question of, it can be found through DLP tools, through data loss prevention. And then loss of human capital. If you are starting to lose human capital, and I'm thinking of Twitter at the moment, Twitter hasn't had a CEO in 3 months. So their senior management obviously knows that they are not going to be selected as CEO because if that were going to happen, it would have happened already. You want to keep good people from leaving, you got to make sure that you have a positive work environment. The next one would be enterprise risk. So non-compliance, as we mentioned earlier. That would be from a HIPAA standpoint, a PCI standpoint, a SOX standpoint. Contract non-compliance, or personally identifiable information. So these are HIPAA non-compliance, lack of contractual controls, access to PII. We've done a risk definition, vulnerability, likelihood, department, risk level, and mediating control. All of these are sort of obvious to everyone here, but the question is your security policy designed around making sure that the mediating control and the remediation are implemented in a way that prevents you guys from facing one of these things? And a lot of organizations say no. You know, they say we check the box, but just because you check the box on DLP or you check the box in your contract with, are you still liable for whatever may happen if any of these things take place? And that's one area where we think that we can help, because making sure that all of these are done as opposed to a box check is the most important thing in security policy. Risk, scored, ranked, prioritized based on compliance. So we mentioned 3 times, all risk is not created equal. Do you guys think that the damage done to Target or Home Depot or Marshalls or something like that, TJ Maxx, happened more at the bank when Target has to pay $30 for a year of credit monitoring? Or do you think it was a reputation risk? Anybody answer? So if that's a reputation risk, can that be quantified? No, I don't think you can quantify a reputation risk either. Can't put a number on it. How many people have given the choice between going to Target and going on Amazon to place an order, simply go on Amazon to place the order, 1, because they don't have to leave their house, and 2, because they're not afraid of using their cards on Amazon in the same way that they use them on Target? I cannot impress upon anybody enough that the risk to your reputation is the most important thing. If you screw it up once, they might trust you again. I mean, Ford Motor Company is a good example of that. People trusted them. The Firestone issue came. I mean, if you think about it, the current owner of the Detroit Lions, which is in the Ford family, is a Firestone, because their families had been so connected for all those years that Martha Firestone Ford is now the controlling owner, now that William Clay Ford III died last spring. They're so connected. The Ford Explorer was the #1 selling sport utility vehicle for 10 years, the first 10 years of its existence. And then that scandal happened with the Firestone tires, and nobody bought it. They went from 407,000 units in 2002 to 317,000 units by 2005. And think about how much value that cost Ford. And Ford didn't have to file bankruptcy like GM and Chrysler did. But that was just sheer value that they lost by reputation. They thought everyone said you could trust their tires. You couldn't trust them. Risk analysis methodology. That actually, as much as I'd like to tell you that can be developed, that there's something I can give you that's like calculus, that's a lie. I can't give you a risk analysis methodology. What I can do is help you guys develop those on your own, so that you'll have one that's personal to the organization, and then it'll say, hey, this is what is important to us risk-wise, and this is how we've identified and overcome those particular risks, or at least gone after the risk level. Qualitative versus quantitative analysis. That's extremely important. Everybody says, qualitative would tell you that we've got X amount of risk and we're going to score it here, here, and here. The quantitative analysis would tell you our users, if we did that, would hate us. So what becomes more important when it comes to measuring risk? How you balance what's important to your end users, versus what are the broader goals of the organization. Frequency, probability, and magnitude before remediation. That's how I do it. I say, what are the risks? who's coming after me? If somebody's sending me malware, and that's one of the places where I'm getting attacked because I have a web application, Facebook, Google, then I say, okay, that's going to happen every day. That's going to happen 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times every day. The probability that I'm going to be attacked. If I'm a web app, 100%. Is somebody attacking GM's website? Maybe, but it's probably not the big time attacks on GM. GM's attacks are going to be an IP, not on their web app. And the magnitude of the attack. If your Codespaces, a company that was completely based in Amazon, they were actually shut down because someone got their private keys, and no one knows to this day if it was an inside job, or if it was an outside job, but they said, pay us $1 million or we're going to basically wipe out your entire database inside Amazon. Wipe out everything, not just your database. Wipe out everything inside Amazon. They said, no, we're not going to pay you $1 million. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, the company's out of business because they gave them 7 to 10 days, I think, to come up with the money. They didn't come up with the money, and now they're out of business. So if the magnitude of the attack is going to destroy your organization, that is obviously important in finding out before you remediate. The application threat model comes from OWASP. That's just something that I'm not an expert in that, but we can help you guys become experts in that based upon what the threats are to your organization. Anybody have any questions? Because I only have 4 more slides and I don't want to bore anyone. And I'm trying to keep it quick and crisp and keep it going. Quick questions? Okay. Allied powers. We got to think back to the Second World War. So there's Russia, the United States, and Britain. There's no ivory tower for risk. So I don't want people to stand up here, don't stand up board and say, these are risks, bang on the, don't do that. That's not what we're here for. We're here to say these are the risks that threaten our organization. Facebook, someone shutting down our servers. GM, someone getting at our IP. The federal government basically being embarrassed. I mean, anybody who's heard anything out of the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, it's just sheer embarrassment. There's not much you can do. It's just embarrassment. And some of it is, how does this affect people in the future? If you know that you can submit personality tests and profiles and whatever to go get a job at the CIA, and this information may well be compromised by a 35-year-old computer system, which is how they were keeping their databases at OPM, are you going to, if you're a graduate of a great school, go and work for Facebook, or are you going to go and work for the CIA? That becomes a matter of, again, reputation. That will distinctly be important when it comes to people who can't really be sued. You can't really get anything from OPM for the fact that your data was compromised. They're just a non-fiduciary party. HR, legal, finance, the business units need representation. We talked about that earlier. That's just a question of make sure everybody is involved. These 3 or 4, or these first 3, because they have access to more information than everyone else. So HR, because they're going to have a system like PeopleSoft or like JD Edwards. Legal, because they're going to be important in making sure that the organization is protected. And finance, because they're going to have access to payroll as well as personal information with regard to each of the employees in the organization. New projects evaluated based on risk assessment. So if you're Google and you're thinking about building a competitor to Tesla like SpaceX, what's the risk to the organization? A lot of people would say, if I'm Google, what does that have to do with your core business? How does that help you sell ads? And they say, we're going to hit your stock price because we could not help you, because that's not what you do. You do something else other than build a spaceship or other than bring internet to the third world. The risk to the organization is large in some cases because what if it crashes? What if it's just like SpaceX and you get a crash or 2? If that were to happen, how does that impact the rest of the organization, and what future will you have if you have something that was hugely risky and not essential to your core business that impacts the organization? I'd say that the risk dependencies are identified. 70% is between compliance and security. You got all these little bubbles. So IT security is a big one. HIPAA, FISMA, PCI, COBIT, SOX, NIST. All these things fit into context. It's just a matter of where you see overlap and how the organization is going to manage this overlap with risk and compliance. Stable, secure, and compliant. I think somebody mentioned at the beginning that it was based upon regulatory. All of this stuff is important. Secure your data, maintain compliance, leverage your people. I think that that's all I can do is hit on those three. Tell me what you guys think is the riskiest thing that your organization does. Somebody raise their hand.
That's confidential.
Granting staff internet access.
Wow. Granting staff internet access for anything on the internet, or granting staff internet access for
Allowing them to have internet access.
work related? Okay.
Even, so I think, right, they could get a malicious email, click on a link, bam.
What kind of controls do you guys have in place to prevent things?
There's controls in place, like
You got a firewall.
content filtering.
Yeah, you got content filtering.
There's controls in place, but all it takes is an unpacked, a vulnerability and a user to click on a link.
So if I told you that the riskiest thing to your organization was the fact that you had employees, would you agree or disagree?
I would agree. I would agree.
So I tend to agree with you, yes, that the internet and the massive amount of information that we have out there is probably the riskiest thing the organization is going to face. However, you've got controls in place. You just mentioned several of them. You said we've got content filtering, we've got URL filtering, we've got firewalls, we've got IPS, we've got lots of things that can help us overcome them. Now, is your security policy written in a way that your users know that their internet usage is extremely important to, or how they manage their internet usage is extremely important to assess, being compliant to the policy?
I'd say yes, but I think there's still room for improvement in awareness and training.
I think we'd all say that. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in this room that says that would say that everybody does everything right all the time. And I think that that's the point. It's not a sort of like Rome wasn't built in a day, but at what point in time during the famed Roman Empire, during hundreds of years of the Roman Empire, do you want to be? Do you want to be at the high point? Do you want to be at the beginning? Do you want to be at the end? Obviously, no one wants to be with the Visigoths coming over the wall. I mean, that's what happened to code spaces, is the Visigoths coming over the wall. That's something where you don't want to be. You want to be at the point where you're feared, but you're powerful, and that you're sort of secure, but knowing every day that if you don't remain vigilant, that you're not going to be secure tomorrow because the threats will change. I mean, I think 2 years ago, before anybody had ever heard of the term next generation firewall, we were all happy with our firewalls. I think everybody was very happy with antivirus 5 years ago. I think that today, firewalls are dead, and I think today, antivirus is dead. I mean, if you're not out there defending at least the digital assets of your organization against zero-day attacks, advanced persistent threats, then you're sort of stuck in 2010 or 2005, and we need to move forward. I hear a lot of people say, well, I have a DMZ. I'm like, nope, you don't have a DMZ. You use Salesforce. You use NetSuite. You use any sort of online system. You no longer have the moat that you think you live in. You have a system that has internal assets, external assets, and they're not nearly as secure as you think. But what you can do is help make them as secure as possible. You guys all come from various different state departments. So if you're public health, sorry about that, go ahead. Yeah.
So you mentioned number one risk of the internal user. So I was wondering, you mean this by year, by state, or current user, or both?
Say that again.
Currently, you have currently the users who access the system.
Uh-huh.
So what you mentioned, what you means by internal user? So one or two or both?
It's a combination, because it's definitely your internal users are the number one source of risk, but it's managing how they conduct themselves, whether they have a USB stick or whether they're using the internet within the organization. And it's how the controls that are in place. So we can all come up with a pie in the sky policy and say everybody must go 35 miles an hour down the street. But if it's an empty street, a lot of people are going to go 40 or 45, just because that's just how things are. It's the same way with end users. This is also the way I look at data policy within organizations and just in general. One of the biggest, or one of the most famous, what I would call cyber attacks was Stuxnet, which is versus Iran. That was an example of the U.S. basically having, and Israel too, but the U.S. and Israel basically having someone take a USB stick and drop it very near to the Iranian nuclear scientists. Someone picks up the USB stick, takes it in, plugs it into a computer. This piece of malware that was on the USB stick, which was totally end user, not something they found on the internet, not something that was sent to them by malware, something basically an end user created problem. They use that to cause the Iranian centrifuges to spin backwards. So all of that is end user created problems that they could have simply solved by saying, if you have a personal USB stick, you're not allowed to plug it into our organization's machines. Other than that, the same nuclear talks that we're having now would not be happening because their nuclear weapon would have been in effect about 8 years ago. Is it good for the world? Probably. But it's one of those things that it's where security policy could have definitely impacted an organization, that being the Iranian nuclear program, because of, or if they had it. I don't know if they had it at the time, and if they did, their users obviously weren't compliant to it. Does that pretty much answer your question? Okay. Evangelize a policy. I hate the ivory tower. I hate the policy on high that comes from someone who never uses the machines. You say to people, no, you can't do this. But why can't I do that? When I was a young kid, probably 10 or 12 years ago, when I first started my first job, we couldn't get to Facebook. Now, in those days, everybody didn't have Facebook. It was something that, but a lot of people did, and especially a lot of people, recent college graduates did at that time. But there was just a no Facebook because social media wasn't nearly as popular or powerful as it is today. We whined and complained forever, and finally they gave us Facebook. And then they took it away because they said people were spending too much time on Facebook. Now, little did they know that Microsoft's going to buy a little company called Yammer, and that social was going to be created because people were going to use social media in context of doing their jobs. That's something that if we would have just simply said to them, let us use Facebook to contact our customers. Let us use Facebook to communicate with each other so that no one has to run upstairs and use the elevators and be away from their desk and miss a potential call from a customer. We didn't say that because we didn't know how to prove to our upper management that Facebook was good for us. It was just a policy that came down upon high. We could have changed it, we just didn't know how. Now when we want something, we simply know. Put together the case for what you want, and then take it to the policy leaders, and they'll incorporate it if it does not present too much risk to the organization. And the last one, I don't think I could say anything more obvious. Strong security policy will be a firewall against both risk and non-compliance. It's as simple as that. If you have a security policy, it's not going to be perfect. Nothing is perfect. But the question is, can it help you? And yes, it will help you. I took some information from NIST, and they just gave me like one organizational best practice, and that's acceptable use. That's the one that I think sort of impacts the end users the most. How do you figure out what is the best way to do things? I don't need to read that. You guys will get a copy of all these presentations, and you can tell me what you think later. But this is acceptable use. If everybody simply acceded to this, because this is the one that impacts the most people. You don't have to, not everybody in there, the janitors probably don't have email, so they're not going to get malware. Or the gardeners or whatever, they don't have email, so that's going to happen to them. Or other third-party contractors are never, the person who works at NetSuite is never going to come to your organization, so they don't have to worry about physical security rules. This is one that's going to impact everyone. And it's going to be the one that most people need to accede by. So if your organization does not have one of these, then this is the first thing that everybody needs to start with, and then say, hey, let's define our acceptable use policy, and then we'll go from there. Does anybody have any questions? I told you I'd get you out of here in 30 minutes. Minute 29, 29:02. All right, oh, wait, one over there.
I think that you don't have any strong policies is perfect, but enforcing it is probably the biggest challenge in the area of
So you came in a little bit afterwards, a little bit after we talked about this one. Yeah, you came in right after this. So it's work with all departments, identify a cross-section of people. Make sure that everybody is involved in it. So if everybody is involved in it, then they have an idea of what it means to the organization and what it could cost potentially if you don't follow the policy. And then once everybody has a stake in it, now they say, hey, we're good at this policy is good for us, and we're all going to make sure that we work at it every day. So it's sort of like when you get up to, a lot of organizations, if you get up to go to the bathroom or whatever, you lock your drawers. I don't think every drawer always came with a lock. I think those new file cabinets come with locks are new. Just because you know that you're downtown, there's vagrants downtown, there could be people who walk into the buildings just because of some other failed policy that someone's not sitting at the front desk being a centurion or whatever, that they know that something could happen to their own personal information. What they're trying to do is decrease it. So having a little lock on the desk that everybody turns when they get up to go to the bathroom or to the water cooler or whatever, it's just something that everybody does. That's where we think if everybody agrees to it, this is something we have to do, they'll do it and it'll decrease the risk by a lot. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, guys. 3:30.